All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tanya and I'm the Chief Social Media Officer for FEZANA, which represents 27 Zoroastrian associations across Canada and the United States, which is roughly 25,000 Zoroastrians in total. FEZANA Talks is a new digital initiative that we launched last year to engage the Zoroastrian community in important dialogue and to showcase young Zoroastrians as well. If you want to stay up to date on future events, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the FEZANA. Today's session allows us to learn more about rituals associated with the Muktad Festival in India and Iran, and the Zoroastrian theological response to it through the enactment of ceremonies remembering the dead. I'd like to first introduce our host, Dinsha Mistree, who will then introduce today's speaker, Khojeste Mistree. Dinsha Mistree has been actively involved in the Zarathushti community for many years, and I feel like that's understated. He does do a lot for our community. At FEZANA, he's one of the active organizers of the FEZANA scholarships. He has also co-founded Zoroastrian Return to Roots and Agyari Connect, where you can get Muktad services performed at an Agyari in Bombay. He is also the nephew of today's speaker, Khojeste Mistree. Apart from his involvement in the community, Dinsha is also a research fellow and lecturer at Stanford Law School. And with that, I'd love to now call upon Dinsha to lead today's session. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. So first, I'll tell you about what the rules might be for this, and then I'll introduce our esteemed speaker, my kaka, Khojeste. If you've got questions, we'll do a question and answer after the presentation. You can either write them in the chat, and I'll address them to Khojeste, or you can raise your hand, and I'll try and call on you in the order that you raise your hand. So I'll try and keep an eye out. It's a little bit hard on Zoom to do both, so I apologize if I call on you second when you were first. So please bear with me. So with that, let me introduce to you Khojeste. Khojeste has been working in the community. If I've been doing it for many years, Khojeste has been doing it for many years. The amount of work he's done is just astounding. I actually think one of the things I think about Khojeste is that if you are a Zoroastrian scholar, a lot of Zoroastrian scholars tend to just stick to the ivory tower and they don't engage with the community that much. Khojeste actually, I think, in my opinion, stopped working in the ivory tower and actually came back to India to trying to do a little bit of a reawakening among our community. And if he hadn't done that, I think our community would have been much worse off. We wouldn't have had the same kinds of connections and understandings that we have now. So he is both an activist and a scholar. And today he's going to talk to us about the importance of the Muktads. I'm looking forward to it. With that, Khojeste, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Dinsha, for the introduction, and thank you, Hassan, for inviting me to give this talk this evening. It's an illustrated slideshow that I'm going to present for the first time on the Muktad ceremony. The title of my talk is Visitations from the World Above, Muktads, the Festival of Hamaspathmaēdaya, which in Iranian terms is the Fravardigan ceremony. I'll be talking about the Parsi Muktad ceremony as well as the Iranian Fravardigan, so that those who have come from Iran will perhaps appreciate how the Muktads are celebrated there. The ancient Zoroastrian festival of Hamaspathmaēdaya, or Muktads, is in remembrance of the souls and spirits of the dead. No other festival is more appropriate in linking the heavens above and the earth we live on as beautifully as this festival does. It is a time of joy and remembering the spirits of our ancestors who visit us, bringing with them a part of their heavenly presence to bless our families, making this festival one which links us to the spiritual world. During the Muktads, the Zoroastrian rituals conducted in fire temples, in houses of worship, or at home helps one to traverse the liminal space between the physical and spiritual worlds by making the celestial world more accessible through the visitations of the Fravishis. This talk will explore the rituals associated with the Hamaspathmaēdaya or Muktad Festival in India and the Fravardigan Festival in Iran, and the Zoroastrian theological response through the enacting of rituals which help to bridge the gap between the physical and the spiritual worlds. Muktad, a term popularly used by the Parsis, is derived from the Sanskrit word muktatma, which entered Parsi Gujarati usage when the famous priest Naryosang Daval in the 12th century CE translated the words Ashonam Fravishinam, the righteous Fravishis, as muktatmana vruddhi. Over time, the word muktatmana was conjugated to muktad, meaning salvation or release. The Persian equivalent for muktad is Fravardigan, which means a celebration in honor of the Fravishis or Fravahars or the guardian spirits. The importance of the Fravishi can be gauged by the existence in our scriptures of the Fravardin Yash 13, dedicated to the Fravishis. The Fravishis or Fravahars is the fifth spiritual component of human beings and is seen as the guardian spirit or the essence of our master in each one of us. Interestingly, in the Fravardin Yash, it is stated that each of the creations of our master, namely the sky, waters, earth, trees, animals, and fire, are looked after by a Fravishi linked to each creation. Yash 13, verse 24, 86. Thus, the essence of our master exists in all the creations, which is why we as Zoroastrians revere the creations of Ahura Master. We're enjoined never to pollute the creations, making us the very first ecologists of the world, long before the term ecology came into vogue. In the Fravardin Yash, the Fravishis are described as winged divinities who fly down from the world above when invoked by Zoroastrians who need their help. Yash 13, verse 70. It is one of the longest Yash, comprising 157 verses. It glorifies the souls and spirits of the great ones from our historical past, and through the dual process of prayers and rituals, the Fravishis are invited to mingle in the physical world with the living. The arrival of the Fravishis unites the spirit being with their living descendants for a continuous period of 10 days of contemplation and prayer. The role of the Fravishis is to help and assist human beings in several ways, and the Fravishis of the living are deemed to be stronger than the Fravishis of the dead. Yash 13, verses 15 and 17, suggesting that the good actions of human beings in the physical world support and strengthen the world above. During the Muktad, the Fravardigan festival, the souls of Western Urvan, Pahlavi Ruvan, of human beings also visit the earth. The soul is a spiritual preceptor or principal agent which directs one's thoughts, words, and deeds in the physical world. Thus, the soul is responsible for an individual's good and bad thoughts, words, and deeds generated during one's life on earth, and is deemed to be the decision maker directing every single thought, word, and action in the life of a Zoroastrian. It is important to remember that upon death, the Fravishis return back to Ahura Master and are not judged celestially, but the soul upon death is judged at the allegorical bridge of the separator, because it is the soul of a human being who is responsible for all the words and deeds in one's life. Zoroastrianism has a unique perspective on the cessation of life. Death in Zoroastrian theology is not the work of an omniscient creator, our master, Pahlavi Hormuzd, but is the temporary triumph of the evil spirit, Angramenu or Ahriman. Zarathustra in his revelation, the Gathas, made a strong case for the existence of a cosmic and ethical dualism in the world. He revealed that there were two spirits, Spentamenu, the virtuous spirit, and its antithesis, Angramenu, the evil spirit, both with totally opposite and contrasting natures. Zarathustra declared, quote, "When these two spirits first came together, they created life and not life." Yasna 30, verse 4. In a later hymn, Zarathustra re-endorsed this position, quote, "Yes, the person indeed who shall try to destroy us, O wise one, is different from us. He is the son stemming from deceit's creator and thereby maleficent." Yasna 51:10. The same theme is promoted in the later Middle Persian text, quote, "Thereupon the evil spirit spoke, I shall destroy thee and thy creatures too, up to eternity." Great Abundation, chapter 1, verse 22. In the sacred text, Ahura Mazda is seen as the creator and giver of life, and therefore he cannot always be seen as a destroyer or bringer of death. Hence, the Zoroastrian mode of disposal is unique, and the afterlife rituals are very important for the protection of the soul in the hereafter. It is important that during the 10-day Muktad Festival, the spirits and souls of the dead come down from the spiritual world, from both heaven and hell, to mingle with their family, friends, and community who invoke them through the mode of prayers and rituals. There is no concept of eternal damnation in Zoroastrian theology, and therefore the souls from hell are also invited for this 10-day festival. It is believed that at the end of time, when the renovation of the world will take place, all the souls from heaven and hell will be resurrected and will dwell in harmony in a perfect world devoid of the forces of evil. For the souls in hell, it is a once-a-year visit to the earth for the Muktad Festival, as they are released from the abyss of hell to enjoy 10 days of hospitality and togetherness with the living. It is believed that the righteous soul can visit the living anytime when invoked ritually in the religious ceremonies, such as the Anushagruvan Jashan, that is a jashan done for the immortal souls of the dead. In the Fravardigan Yash, both the souls and Fravishis come into the physical world to enjoy friendship and fellowship with their family and friends, and they ask, quote, "Who will praise us? Who will worship us? Who will sing hymns to us? Who will propitiate us with hand containing meat, galmata, and garments, bastravata, with the highest praise? Of which of us will be praised by name? Of which of you will be the soul be worshipped? To whom will the gift be given, who may have everlasting food forever?" Yash 13, verse 50. In a later verse, the Fravishis who are revered set the tone of the ritual, quote, "We worship here the life, the intelligence, soul, and Fravishi of righteous men and women, of the Pyrotekeshas, the first teachers, and the first acceptors of the religion, who fought with triumph for righteousness." Yash 13, verse 149. Within the ritual framework, the Fravishis are invoked, worshipped, and praised through 1, the Baj, 2, the Stoom ritual, 3, the Athravan, and 4, the Farokshi. Specially cooked food, sweet-scented wood, clothing, and flowers are offered by way of gifts by the priests in honor of them. The Baj, which is an inner ritual, is performed to consecrate the thrown bread and the garments offered in the ceremony. In the Stoom ritual, a breakfast, mid-morning lunch, and evening meal are prepared and cooked with strict ritual purity by specially appointed Zoroastrian cooks. After consecration, the food is partaken by the priests and the fire temple helpers. In the Afrinagan ceremony performed for the soul and the spirit of the deceased, the names of the righteous Zarathustra and his family members are remembered, as well as names of family members both deceased and living. The Farokshi ritual involves the recitation of the Fravardigan Yash, which is one of the oldest litanies dedicated to the celestial beings. In this recital, the historical personages of Iran are recalled in an effort to preserve and embed their memories using the ritual format as a device. The Muktad rooms in India is usually set up in a fire temple, whereas the Fravardigan festival is celebrated at home in Iran. Similarly, at the holy Iran shrine Udvada, no Muktad tables are placed in the Atashberam. The Muktad festival in Udvada, like in Iran, is performed in the homes of individual priestly families, where the sanctity of the ritual is the responsibility of the family. In the past, many Parsi homes had a Muktad room where the 10-day festival was celebrated. If one can maintain the laws of purity and be careful in the observances, then the 10-day festival can be held in a separate room at home. The items on the Muktad table represent all the 7 creations, and this is interesting. The iron stand is under the guardianship of Sherevar, representing the sky. The waters in a vase is under the guardianship of Khordad. The earth is represented by the marble top and is under the guardianship of Spendarmat. The plant world of flowers is under the guardianship of Amardad. The animal world is represented by the clarified butter or oil used in the oil lamp and is under the guardianship of Baman. Man, who is under the guardianship of Hormuz, is represented by the name of the deceased on the vase itself. The last creation of fire, which is under the guardianship of Ardivesh, is represented by the flame of the Devo on the Muktad table. A large fire vase is placed on a low stone table in a room and is cared for by the priests, who ensure that the fire is kept burning throughout the 10 days of the Muktad. During the Muktad festival, the activities in the fire temple begin around 3:45 a.m. in the morning, when the Panthki, that is the family priest, and volunteers help to clean, purify, and set up the Muktad precinct for each day. Activity in the fire temple is greatly enhanced between 6 a.m. and 12 noon, and then again in the evening from 3:45 p.m. until just before the sun sets, by which time all the day's rituals are over. On Ashishwang Rood Spendarmat Ma, that's the 25th day of the last month of the Zoroastrian calendar year, volunteers clean the hall of the fire temple with well water, and newly painted Rota and Muktad stands and tables are washed with well water and arranged in the main hall of the fire temple. A 3-legged or 4-legged wrought iron table is used, and each leg of the table is connected with the intersecting metal rods a few inches above the base of the floor. A marble slab is placed on the stand, creating the platform, as you can see in this slide. A tag with the family name is tied on the table's leg to help identify the table on which the family vases will be placed. Silver or German silver vases are placed upside down on the marble table to mark the start of the Muktads. Each vase set on the marble table represents a deceased family member. The name, day and month and year of death according to the Zoroastrian calendar etched on the base or rim of each vase to particularize it after the vase has been consecrated by the priest for the first Muktad. An oil lamp, preferably of clarified butter, Gujarati ghee, is placed besides the vases. A washed, consecrated white cotton cloth, 4 meters in length with a pushti, is placed on another square white piece of cloth with 4 ends of cloth knotted over it to form a bundle known as siav, which is placed in a small metal tray on the Muktad table. You can see all this in the slide before you. The 4-meter cloth is first hand-washed with well water, dried in the sun, and then consecrated during a bath ceremony in memory of the departed soul. The folded cloth length is placed on the table for the Fravishis to metaphorically wear during their visit to the physical world. After the festival, this siav is gifted to the priest or to the person who uses it to make sudres. Now, however, in the first year of death, an akhan siav comprising of 10 items is consecrated in the bath ceremony to be used in the muktad. A 1 meter square white cotton cloth is laid out and a number of items are placed upon it in a set order, starting from the bottom, working upwards. A pair of white hand socks, Gujarati petava, a pair of white pajamas, Gujarati ejar, a 4 meter white cotton piece of priest's robes, Gujarati jamal, a 2 meter white cloth 6 inches in width for a kamarband, Gujarati pichori, a sudre, a mouthpiece and nose mask, padan, a white cotton cap, Gujarati topi, another 2 meter cotton cloth 4 inches in width to use for a turban, Gujarati pagri, and a Khojeste, which is placed on top of this pile of garments. The 4 corners of the square cloth are tied with a reef knot over the garments, forming the akhan shao. Just before dawn breaks on Ashtad Roj, that is the first Muktad day, all the vases are turned upright, as you saw in the earlier slides, and filled to the brim with water and sweet-scented flowers by a team of volunteers. The oil lamp on each table is lit, the siav is placed on the table, a fixed format of rituals begin with the recitation of the barge of Ardha-Fravash, comprising verses from Yasnas 3 to 8, followed by the breakfast stoom. Members of the laity arrive soon after dawn to witness and experience the ceremonies performed by the priests. A priest who is endowed with ritual power, Amal, performs the barge ceremony within a demarcated precinct in the fire temple called the Urvisga. This precinct where inner rituals are performed is poetically described by the high priest, thus through Dr. Firoz Kotwal, quote, as the court of the Lord of rituals. Well water is used to purify all the utensils and metal ritual implements which are used by the priests. The barge of Ardha-Fravash is performed in honor of all the righteous Fravishis, beginning with the recitation of the Shnuman of Fravardigan, followed by the prologue, known as the Pazan Dibacha prayer. In the Dibacha, the names of the deceased are remembered 3 times. During this ritual, 4 unleavened round pieces of bread, 3.5 inches in diameter and 1/8 of an inch in thickness, known as a drone, Gujarati darun, similar to a tortilla, are consecrated. 2 drones have 9 cut marks falling 3 rows representing the 9,000 years Gumazishan period of the apocalyptic tradition, as you can see on this slide. The 2 unmarked drones are known as frasast. Both the drones and the frasast are smeared with a small dollop of clarified butter and is embellished with a few pomegranate seeds. At a certain point in the ritual, the priest breaks a small piece of the sacred bread and he tastes it by lifting his mouth veil. The testing is known as taking of chashni. Through tasting the bread smeared with clarified butter topped with a pomegranate seed, the plant and animal worlds are brought metaphorically into the ritual by the priest. After the completion of the barge of Ardha-Fravash, the consecrated drones are given to another set of priests who place it with the fruits laid out on a tray for the Afrinagan ceremony, which will be performed later. After the barge of Ardha-Fravash, the morning stoom ritual is performed, and breakfast dishes prepared in the early hours of the morning are placed in a circular tray on a 3-legged metal stand known as anni, which is why I'm showing you this slide. Obviously, it has sandalwood on the top, but the same tray can hold different sorts of food. The stand is placed near a continuously burning fire, especially lit and maintained for the muktads. The breakfast dishes, usually prepared by the priest's household, follow the strict laws of purity. Breakfast dishes include a variety of food offerings, such as a cup of tea, eggs, sweets, semolina, salted liver, and chapat, sweet pancakes for the soul and spirits of the departed to enjoy the fragrance of the food symbolically. The Stumno Kardo, which is in the main recitation of Yasna 26, is in praise and worship of the spirits and souls of the departed. The priest recites, quote, "We worship the good, strong, beneficent Fravishis of the righteous. We worship the life-conscious, intelligent souls and the Fravishis of the righteous men and women. We worship here these souls of the departed ones who belong to the Fravishis of the righteous. We worship the Fravishis of the teachers." Stum Karda, verses 3, 4, 7, and 8. During the Stum ritual, the priest intones in Baj the Pazan passages sandwiched between two Avestan sections. In the recitation that follows, the priest declares the city's name in which the Stum is being performed, followed by the names of notable ancestors from Zoroastrian history, names of family members of Spitama Zarthustra, venerable priests such as Mobed Shapur and Mobed Shariar, the two priests from whom the lineage of all Parsi priests are drawn, and kings such as Shah Gustasp and Shah Lurasp are recited. After that, the names of the deceased members of the family are taken 3 times in a set hierarchical order. Towards the end of the ritual, the names of our master, the Amesha Spenters, and the family member who has requested the ritual is taken. The Avestan portion again begins with the words, Vispau Fravishio Ashonyam, of all the Fravishis of the righteous, and the ritual ends with the unit of 4-fold prayers, starting with the Ammai Raescha, followed by the Hazangaram, Jasimavenge Mazda from Siroza Yas verses 20 and 21, and ending with the Kerfe Most prayer. The Stum ritual takes approximately 15 minutes to recite, and the priests and the fire temple helpers enjoy the consecrated breakfast. The same formula of prayers is recited for the mid-morning and late afternoon and evening Stum ceremonies, and the last Stum is done before the sun sets. The Stum offering traditionally always should have a meat dish and a sweet dish for the departed souls and spirits to enjoy the fragrance symbolically. During the Gatha days and the recitation of the Stum, the names of all the 5 Gathas are remembered. The 5 Gatha days are additional days added after completing the 30 days of the Svendarmat Ma, the last month of the Zoroastrian calendar, which is what we are in currently. It is vital to remember that there is no month attached to the 5 Gatha days, and therefore the name of the month is not recited in any of the prayers when praying during the Gatha days. Next, in the fire temple, the Afrinagan is performed and is undertaken by 2 priests, known as the Zautar and his assistant, the Raspi. The Afrinagan recited for the first 5 days of the Muktads comprises of 3 paths or 3 kardas dedicated to the Yazatas, Arda Fravash, Damman, and Srosh, followed by the Afrins of Arda Fravash, Borzogan, and Haft Ameshaspans. I'm not going into details of the actual ceremonies themselves because of the shortage of time. On each day, the names of the deceased family members are recited from a list in the individual family's Namgrahan, or name book kept by the Pantki or the head priest of the fire temple. During the Afrinagan ceremony, the Zautar blesses all the fruits, the sweets offered, including a pomegranate, which is cut in half. It's similar to a Jashan ceremony that I'm sure most of you have experienced wherever you come from. The Afrinagan recitation ends with the Dua Tandurusti prayer, recited for the well-being, good health, and prosperity of the living. In a sense, the Zautar, through his prayers, brings down the magic of the spiritual world to consecrate the fruits and other offerings. The fragrance of the chasnis enjoyed by the souls and spirits of the dead invoked through the ritual. The laity are given the fruits and other sweet offerings as chasni, consecrated food to take home. The Anushaga Ravan for Afrinagan performed on each day of the Muktads lasts for about an hour. The fourth ceremony that is performed in the fire temple is the Fravishis ceremony. A ritual dedicated to the Fravishis involves the recitation of the Fravardin Yasht. In the Farashi, the recitation of the Fravardin Yasht is preceded by the dibache or prologue of the Stum no Cardo. In the recital, a long list of names of the Fravishis and souls of illustrious Zoroastrian ancestors are remembered. It begins with the naming of the Fravishi of Zarthustra, Vishtaspa, Jamaspa, the sons of Zarathustra, his wife, other notables comprising the names of kings, priests of old, heroes, and warriors, who are all invoked and remembered. In the final part of the Farashi, the names of the deceased family members are taken from the Namgran book, which is maintained by the Pantki. This ceremony, which is also recited during the Muktads, takes around 45 minutes when recited properly. On the last watch of Vahishto Ishti Gatha, which is the fifth day, around 3 a.m., the final barge of Gatha is celebrated, followed by an Afrinagan. After the Afrinagan, the Farashi is recited, and it follows the same earlier format of prayers. After that, a final Stum ceremony is performed in the fire temple. The Stum food, in a sense, is linked to the journey back to the spiritual world from where the souls and Fravishis have come. Therefore, the food offered is a dry hamper with a sweet dish prepared for all the Fravishis and souls to enjoy during the return journey to the spiritual world. After the rituals are completed in the early morning hours, the smoldering fire in the fire vase is taken to the Muktad tables to allow the fragrance of frankincense and sandalwood to permeate the air, bidding farewell to the spirits and souls of the dead. The team of fire temple helpers remove the flowers and discard the water from the vases, which are turned upside down on the table as a gesture to mark the departure of all the Fravishis who are invited for the festival. The oil lamps are extinguished and the Muktad hall is cleared and made ready to welcome community members on Hormuz Rouge, Fravardin Ma Nowruz, the new day at the break of dawn. Now, these are some of the prayers that can be or should be recited during the Muktad days. I've made a special list for those of you who would like to do this at home. Perform the Padyabe Kushti, which is do your Kushti, then recite the Shrosh Baj, the relevant Ga prayers, the Faraziyat prayers, Shasas Koshid Mer Nioesh, Dua Nam Setyoeshne, Vispa Humata, Char Disano Namaskar, the Atish Nioesh prayer, the Framrat Ha, that is Yasna 20, is recited during the first 5 Muktad days. And if you don't want to recite the Framrat Noha, then 1200 Hashem Vahus can be prayed instead. Each Gatha specific to the days recited on each of the 5 Gatha days, or 1200 Yatahu varios may be recited on each Gatha day. Then the Stum no Karda is recited, and finally the Dua Tandarusti for the living. Now, these are things that some of you at home might like to do if you want to actually celebrate the Muktads at home. Obviously, we have the luxury of fire temples in India, whereas in many other parts of the world, this luxury does not exist. So if one cannot celebrate Muktads in a fire temple, but if one wishes to remember the near and dear ones, then the following items and ceremonies can be done at home. A room or an area in the house needs to be emptied and cleaned thoroughly, and the ritual laws of purity should be observed during the 10-day festival. A metal stand with a marble top is used at the Muktad table. On the Muktad table, like in the fire temple, early on Ashtar Rosh, one places a clean metal vase filled with water and fresh sweet-scented flowers. A devo using clarified butter a siav consisting of a length of cotton fabric or a new sudre and a new kushti, a prayer book, and a list of names of the deceased family members who are to be invoked and remembered are written down. The oil lamp is kept burning 24/7 during the festival, as the souls and spirits are said to gravitate towards the light of the flame and feel comfortable mingling around the devo. A variety of food cooked daily has to be prepared for the 3 stoom rituals for the spiritual guests who will be visiting during the Muktad Festival. A lobandan on which one can burn incense is needed during the recitation of prayers. And finally, a sense of responsibility and reflection must be maintained for the ceremonies to be done properly during the 10 days. One cannot choose to do muktads, for example, on day 1, and then take a break of a few days and restart the muktads for the remaining days of the festival. As an alternative, 2 or 3 families may get together and share the responsibilities of all that has to be done by way of prayers and ritual paraphernalia, and the muktads then can be celebrated in someone's home. A point of interest, the time of repentance. Before I conclude the first part of my talk, I want to add here that the popular Parsi Gujarati word pateti, avestan paitit, meaning repentance, is erroneously used by the Parsis to represent the last day of the year. In fact, pateti only refers to a small time frame of about an hour, not a day, allocated for the recitation of the Patet Pashimani prayer just before dawn breaks for the new year. In the hour just before dawn, after a bath, the kushti is retied, the Stroshbaj and the Ushangar prayers are recited, followed by the Patet Pashimani prayers. In the Patet prayer, one repents, for all the sins committed during the year about to end. Wishing anybody Pateti Mubarak is wrong, as one cannot wish happy repentance to a person. As dawn breaks, the Padyap Kushti is redone, and the Hushbam prayer, which welcomes dawn, begins then with the new day. Khodad Sal. Khodad Sal is seen as the greater new year and is celebrated 6 days after Nowruz as a symbolic birthday of Prophet Spitaman Zarthustra. In India, some Orthodox Zoroastrians begin the preparation for the Muktad Festival a day earlier on Ashishrang Ruz, that is a day before Ashtad Ruz, and end the Muktad Festival a day after Khordad Ruz on Amardad Ruz, thereby extending the celebration of this festival for 18 days in India. However, in the ancient Fravardigan Yash, the Festival of Hamaspathmaēdaya is referred to as a 10-day festival, Yash 13, verse 49. It is mind-blowing to learn that the Fravardigan Yash has been dated by Professor Burroughs to circa 7th century BCE, making it one of the oldest Yashs, giving information on the Festival of Hamaspathmaēdaya and its celebration for 10 days. I'd now like to move on to the Iranian Fravardigan Festival. So for those of you Iranian Zoroastrians listening in, this might be of particular interest to you all. This slide basically shows you a modern-day remembrance in Tehran of a Muktad ceremony. This brings me to the second part of my talk, the Iranian tradition of the Fravardigan. In late 1975, my late professor Mary Boyce was invited to give the famous Ratanbhai Kathrak lectures at the University of Oxford. I had the privilege to attend these lectures whilst I was studying at Oxford University. Some years later, her 6 lectures were published in a book titled A Persian Stronghold of Zoroastrianism. In her book, she describes the Fravardigan festival in great detail, her observations and experiences, came from her having attended the 10-day Kadmi Fravardigan festival in the village of Sharifabad, Ardakan, 80 kilometers northwest of Yazd in the early 60s, 1963-64. She bore witness to these ceremonies, and I shall be highlighting her meticulously recorded documentation of the local custom and ritual traditions followed by the Zoroastrians living then in Sharifabad. Let me pause here and say that in this part of my talk, I will be recounting information written by Professor Mary Boyce. I know that many of these practices are not followed anymore because of the demands of modernity and the relentless pace of time. Nevertheless, I do believe that the ancient practices of our Yazdi Zoroastrians are part of our community's intangible religious heritage, and by reflecting upon them, we will at least preserve its memory for the future. In Iran, the 10-day Rozan Fravardigan festival is divided into two sections, Panji Kasog, the lesser 5 days from Ruze Ashtad to Ruze Aniran, and Panji Mas, which is seen as the greater 5 days, comprising the 5 Gatha days. In Sharifabad, it was believed that the souls and spirits of deceased children would specially come down from the spirit world during the first 5 days of the Fravardigan festival. In contrast, the Panji Mas, the 5 Gatha days, is when all the souls, including those from hell, are allowed to come annually during the Fravardigan festival. On the other hand, righteous souls from heaven come down from the spiritual world whenever the living invoke them in the rituals. On Ruze Ashtad, the first day of the lesser 5 days, the household men bring fine clay, gel, in Hessian bags to model a variety of clay figurines and animal forms. On Ruze Asman, the clay is wetted with clean well water by the men, and miniature models of camels and human figurines are made by the family. The women stitch tiny panniers, bags, made of cloth for the small camel and donkey clay figurines, and they also stitch clothes for the human clay figurines. On the same day, 2 small square wooden boxes are washed in running water and filled with clean soil from their farms. On Ruze Zamyad, that is the 3rd day of the Fravardigan, 7 kinds of seeds are sown in a box filled with soil for the seeds to sprout by New Year's Day, that is Hormuz Roj Fravardin Ma. Wheat, yellow lentil, mung or green gram lentils, edible barley, red beans, chickpeas, and watercress seeds are planted in the box. The 7 different seeds represent the 7 bounteous immortals who each look after one of the 7 creations. On the same day, Ruze Zamyad, the house is thoroughly cleaned, including the flat roof of the house. On the 4th day, on Ruze Marispan, the ladies of the house take a woven basket made with strips of cloth, and they line it with a thick layer of cotton wool moistened with clean water, in which a variety of herbs are sown. According to the tradition practiced in Yazd, the basket also has a sudre, a kushti, mrut leaves, sedab leaves, alocasia nebula, bay fruit, which is quince, nabot, which is a sugar cone usually covered with green silver paper, a pomegranate, and a cucumber. On a separate tray, wine, milk, and rose sherbet are placed. On Ruze Aniran, the 5th day, the men take a cow or donkey to their farm in the early hours of the morning and bring back to their home 2 large bags full of fine clay paste mixed with chopped straw and moistened with water from a clean stream. The women bathe after performing their kushti rituals. They visit the dastur's home to sip a small amount of nirang to wash away their impurities. They then prepare the room set aside to welcome the souls and fravishis of their loved ones. This special room, cleaned and readied for the Fravardigan festival, is known as Ganza Pak, the holy room. The fine clay mixture is carefully spread across the floor of the Ganza Pak by the men and allowed to dry. In the evening, the animal sheds within the courtyard are cleaned and fresh hay and straw are put in the stable for the souls and spirits brings to mingle with the spirit beings to mingle with the family members in a clean and purified environment. A large white square cloth is placed on the floor of the Ganja Park, and the whitewashed animal and human clay figurines are placed on the white cloth. A mirror and a brazier with burning embers is kindled from the hearth fire and placed on the floor. An oil lamp is lit and placed before the mirror on the floor for the glow of the flame to reflect in all directions. This oil lamp is kept burning continuously until the festival ends. In the morning and evening, fragrant and roasted boya branch dishes are prepared to delight the souls and spirits of the deceased family members. Families in the village enjoy other hospitality by being together and sharing cooked food. The local priest visits each house every day and is invited to perform the necessary rituals to bless the food. On the first Gatha day, no farming work is done by the family. On the second Gatha day, white lime water sprinkled on the flat roofs of Yazdi homes, for it is believed that the spirit guests stay in the Ganza Park, Muktad room, enjoying the glow of the burning oil lamp around them. On the third Gatha day, boya branch, fragrant roasted food for the spirits, especially prepared in the morning for their lunch, and siro, and eggs are cooked for breakfast. On the fourth Gatha day, more boya branch foods are prepared, but this time the food is cooked in pure sesame seed oil. The food is prepared and taken to the Ganza Park for the Fravishis and the souls to enjoy the fragrance and join the festivities. On the fifth Gatha day, the Yazdi Zoroastrians sacrifice 2 sheep, and the sacrificial meat is roasted to prepare a festive meal for both the living and the dead. Nane Shekar, a white sweet bread, is made on this day for the souls of young children to partake and enjoy. I talked about the figurines, and this is the shot to show you. In the evening of the fifth Gatha day, after the priest has finished reciting the Gahambar prayers, the clay models and the 2 wooden boxes containing the sprouted seeds are placed on the terrace roof besides the clay figurines. Now see what happens. This is just before, at the end of the Fravardigan festival. This is a video that was recently taken on the 17th of July in Yazd. All those flames that you see are Zoroastrian homes following the Qadimi calendar, basically wishing the Fravishis farewell as they go back into the spiritual world. It's an incredibly moving shot. So an oil lamp is lit and a fire in a brazier burns with sweet-smelling herbs and incense. Around 3 a.m. on the night of the fifth Gatha day, in the early hours before the new year sets in, family members are woken up by the women who have already lit the brushwood on the terrace for the Tashaboom. A senior member of the family recites the Afrinagan of Dam, and as dawn sets in, all the family members look eastwards, waiting for the sun to rise, to bid farewell to the Fravishis and the souls, to wish them a safe journey back to their spiritual abode. The children, looking skywards, wave their hands as a farewell gesture to the honored guests from the spirit world. At daybreak, that is Ruse Hormas, New Year's Day, the brushwood fire lit on the roof is taken by the men in procession to deposit the embers in what's called the Khakane of the fire temple. You can see the little area in the front. That's the Karkhane, and there's a close-up to show you the Karkhane. And after that, the holders do their Padyabe Koshti and recite the Havenge prayers to welcome the new year, Ruze Hormas Mahe Fravardin, formally. The women sprinkle water with powdered marjoram leaves on the roof of the terrace. The families greet each other and have breakfast together on the terrace, drinking wine and toasting each other with good health. On Khodat Sal, which is 6 days after Nowruz, known as Havzoru in Persian, the Zoroastrian villagers wear 7 new things and take 7 sips of wine. The Moved performs the Visperat ceremony to mark the start of the Havzoru celebration. The women prepare a herb jar for the festival. Havzoru is the greater New Year and is connected to the ancient calendar of the 3rd century CE, before Shapur's calendar reform was instituted. A wonderful ancient tradition is preserved amongst the Yazdi Zoroastrians. After Havzoru, the boxes with the sprouted shoots and plants are not watered and are allowed to dry and wither. This act sustains an old belief that the Fravishis arrived on their horses as warriors from heaven, and the plants grown in the boxes were for the nourishment of their horses, who happily ate the green sprouted tender plants over the 10-day festival, leaving behind the dry stubbles in the wooden boxes. This brings me to the end of my talk, and while the Kadmi New Year was celebrated on the 17th of July this year, the Parsi Shahanshai Muktads will begin on the 6th of August, 2021. I hope that you are, as of now, better informed after this talk and will be ready to greet the souls and Fravishi spirit warriors as they come flying in for the Muktads on Ruze Ashtad Spendarmat Ma. Finally, before I close, I would like to quote one of my favorite verses from the Fravardin Yash, describing the glory of the Fravishis. Quote, "By their brightness and glory, the waters flow, flowing forward from the never-failing springs. By their brightness and glory, the plants spring up from the earth by the never-failing springs. By their brightness and glory, the winds driving the clouds blow from the never-failing springs. By their brightness and glory, a human being is born who listens well to the holy words, whom wisdom holds dear. The sun goes his way, the moon goes her way, and the stars go their way." Yash 13, verses 14 to 16. Ushtate, and thank you for listening. May happiness be to you all.
Great. Thank you very much, Khojeste. We have almost 200 participants on the call right now, and we've been getting a lot of questions over the chat. So perhaps if you've got other questions, it might just be easier logistically if you put them into the chat so I can see them. The questions we've gotten so far, they can be grouped. One is requests for books and further reading. One is about textual references, then the history of the Parsi ceremony and the Iranian ceremony separately. So let's start with the first question. So if people wanted to find out more about the Muktads or about the Iranian version of the Muktads, are there any places where they should look to read?
Well, as far as Iranian Muktads are concerned, Persian Stronghold would be their best book. This is the book as it was done in the early 60s. Obviously, as I mentioned in my talk, things have changed. As far as the present-day Muktads are concerned, I cannot recommend one book except that the Jivanji Modi, Parsi Customs and Ceremonies, basically talks about the whole Muktad ceremony in reasonable detail. So for the Parsi Muktads, I would recommend that book. But again, it means going through a lot of information, some of which might be quite technical and theoretical. So these are the two books that I would recommend for the Parsi Muktad and the Iranian Fravardigan Festival.
Great. There's a request from the organizers. If we can turn off the screen share, then yeah, perfect. In terms of textual references, you mentioned several of the yashts. Where else might we find this in our, our ecclesiastical texts? References to the muktads or specific prayers that we're supposed to do?
Well, Dinsha, remember that I've had to go through an immense amount of reading to collect the references that I've offered you. So from that point of view, I don't think that find all the references in one source. Again, for Jivanji Modi would certainly be a very good source to go to. And Khojeste P, as far as the Pravardin Yash is concerned, if people want to check the translation of the Pravardin Yash, which I've quoted extensively, then that's another place to go to. As far as the Pravardin Yash is concerned, just on a personal note, it was one of the texts that I had to translate when I was a student at Oxford University. So a lot of the translations that I've used are my own. But again, if you want the complete translation of the Pravardin Yash, the Khojeste P by Kanga would be your best bet.
Great, thank you. Do we know anything about the history of this ceremony in terms of how far back it goes? When were the first muktads performed?
Dinsha, I would say to you that if the Pravardin Yash is 7th century BCE, then probably in Athenian times, Spartan times, these ceremonies would have been practiced that has come down to us. So that we have taken the Muktad ceremonies in the format that the Sasanians practiced from the 3rd century onwards, or maybe from Athravan, which is in the 4th century CE. So certainly one can safely say that what the Parsis are practicing in India is at least 1600 years old, if not earlier. And the Iranian tradition probably goes back even further.
Two people asked about the change of dates. So they say that when they were growing up in India, muktads were 18 days. Today it's performed over 10 days. Can you explain why that change happened and what we might have lost with the 8 days less?
As I explained in my talk, for those who follow the 18-day muktads, they accept New Year as Khodad Roj. That means Khodad Sal, what generally we refer to as Khodad Sals. So if you take the muktad starting from Ashishwang Roj and go one day beyond Khodad Sal, coming to Amardad Roj, that is what gives you an 18-day window. Now, if I explain why this happened, I can explain it, but it would take time. I would have to explain to you a calendar intercalation that took place during the reign of Shapur I in the 3rd century of the CE, and that will take quite a lot of time. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's the 10-day muktad that the Pravardin Yash talks of, verse 49, as I mentioned. The 18-day muktad is something that developed much later. If somebody wants to know how the calendar intercalation happened, maybe they can send me an email, and not immediately as I'm quite busy, I will try and respond to that, explaining how the 18-day muktad came about.
Great. There's several questions about specifics of the ritual itself, or rituals both for the Parsi muktads as well as the Iranian. Before we do that, there's this one question by Zinia. Are the terms soul, Fravishi, and spirit interchangeable, or is there a difference?
Sorry.
The term soul, Fravishi, interchangeable.
The soul is Urvan or Ruvan. The Fravish is the spirit being. They're not interchangeable, they're totally separate, because in my talk I mentioned that it's only the soul which is judged at the bridge of the separator, the allegorical bridge of the separator on the 4th morning after death, whereas the Fravishis, being the essence of Aura Mazda, goes straight back into the spiritual world because clearly Aura Mazda can do no wrong. So therefore, Zoroastrianism is one of the very few religions in the world which recognizes a difference between the soul and the spirit. And so we have to look at both these components in a very, very specific Zoroastrian way, as versus just glossing it over saying the spirit and the soul are the same. They're not the same in Zoroastrianism, they're totally different.
Great, thank you. So now I think we're going to get into the specifics of the rituals, and I'm going to read some of these questions aloud. This one is from Armaiti Anand Sagar. Sorry. So why is the scum on the ani when during other prayers the fruits, etc., are on the floor during other ceremonies? I think this question is about why the ritual elements are placed differently in this ritual.
Remember that when a ritual is performed, it is performed on the ground in terms of a demarcated area. So if it's, for example, the Afrinagan, the Paruksi, etc., they're done on the floor of the fire temple. As far as the tables are concerned, these tables are basically there where the spirits and the souls of the Fravishis and come down, and therefore that is on a height. The stoom ritual, for example, is also done on a standing. The priest beside the prayer standing. They don't sit on the floor and do it. So this is a convention that has developed in India, where the main rituals, as it were, of the Fravardigan and Paruksi and the Baj are done sitting on the floor, and the stoom, for example, is done standing.
Related to this is from Maruk. She would like to know the significance of a three-legged iron table, and whether, if you're doing this in your house, whether a wooden table could be used instead of a three-legged iron table.
We don't know about the three-legged table, except that as I mentioned, and as you saw on the screen, we have references of a three-legged Muktad table going back to Kyrgyzstan in the 7th, 8th centuries. It's Guyana. So obviously the design of the three-legged table is a very ancient design which came into India, and we've adopted it. But then later on, in the last 100-odd years, square tables have also come into fire temples and so forth. And so that's how the square tables have come in. The important thing is that it has to be of iron. The basic stand has to be of iron, because that represents the world of metal. It represents Sherevar, the Amesha Spencer, who looks after both the world of metal as well as the sky. And for the Anni, if you notice, is interconnected. Each leg of the Anni is interconnected, and there's great symbolism in that as well.
Another question about practicing Muktad at home. Should there be separate vases for each of the departed that are being remembered, or should there be one common vase for all?
If you're doing it at home, you need to have separate vases for each individual, because remember that on the vase, the name of the deceased is written. You can't talk about one family vase. You have to have separate vases. You can have small beakers in which you put maybe 2 or 3 small flowers, etc. As far as the stoom is concerned, you can mention the people together.
And to conclude this rapid fire, oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So as far as the stoom ritual is concerned, what one does is one mentions the name of the particular person you are thinking of, and then others who have died. So for the stoom ritual, as many vases as you have, you'd have to repeat the stoom ritual accordingly. So if you have 3 vases on a table, you'd have to repeat the stoom 3 times for each individual vase, as is done in the fire temple.
Just to conclude on questions about doing Muktad at home, we've got a question about what can we feed the souls that are coming down? Can we put out fruits instead of a home-cooked meal? Should we put things that the departed soul might enjoy when they were here? What can be?
I would say to you that home-cooked food is important because remember, one has to maintain the ritual laws of purity. It doesn't have to be as elaborate a meal as maybe you've seen on the slides, but it needs to be home-cooked stuff, whether it's a breakfast thing, an egg and tea is not difficult to make. If it's a mid-lunch thing, a meat dish and a sweet dish with something small. I mean, these are things people would eat normally. So in fact, this is the food that one would normally consume at home. So I would say to you that if you're doing the muktad and if you want to do it properly, then these are some of the things that one needs to do. And it's good discipline for the 10 days that one wants to celebrate the muktad. I don't think you can order food from McDonald's, in other words.
Well, maybe not for everybody, but maybe when I'm a dearly departed soul, I might want to crave some French fries or something. Let's see what happens. One more question about the ritual, and then we're getting a lot of, I would say, larger questions coming in right now about Zoroastrianism as a whole, which we'll ask after this one. In one of the slides that you put up, there were clay figures that were left on roofs. I think this was in the Iranian slides. What's the significance or the meaning behind those figures?
These are domesticated animals that obviously the Zoroastrian farmers in ancient days, and even when Professor Boyce lived there, and even during my numerous visits to Iran, I've interacted with Zoroastrian farmers. They have a much stronger connection with their land. And if they have a connection with their land, what would they have? Sheep, horses, donkeys, camels, etc. So these are the sort of figurines that are made basically as something to make the spirits feel comfortable, that they would have probably experienced this and seen all this when they were living in the physical world. And so in that sense, it's a replica. And obviously the human figurines represent human beings. So I think it's rather beautiful that the whole family gets involved in making these figurines and actually celebrating the spirit of the Muktad or Fravardigan festival rather than expecting third parties or priests to do everything. In Iran, from what I observe, the Fravardigan is much more of a family involved festival. Everybody, men, women, children, they're all involved and they all come together, and then obviously family and friends living around them also come together. So in that sense, I would say to you that the Festival of Fravardigan in Iran does have a very special quality. And as you saw from the rooftops, remember this is 2021, and the slide that I showed you, the video that you saw with the number of brushwood fires burning on umpteen number of Zoroastrian homes, that says it all, I think.
Another question about the Fravardigan festival. This is usually celebrated around Nowruz in March, or is this celebrated at some other time of the year? And what's the relationship between the Haftseen table and what they might set up for the Fravardigan festival?
The Haftseen table is in the Zoroastrian home. You have to have 7 items beginning with sh. And if you're Muslim, then it's with sir. So there's a great difference between the Nowruz table and the Fravardigan table. So that's the first point. For those who follow the Fasli calendar, then yes, Fravardigan falls from the 21st of March onwards. It's a March festival. If you follow the Qadimi calendar, which is what obviously many Zoroastrians and Yazds looking at this latest slide that I showed you all, obviously they do follow the Qadimi calendar as well for them to celebrate and the burning of the wood on their flat rooftops, etc. So maybe in Tehran, the Qadimi calendar is not popular, and obviously in Tehran, in the city, perhaps it's difficult to burn fires on flat roofs. They don't have them in Tehran, whereas in Yazd and the smaller villages in and around Yazd, they certainly do it with great gusto and great feeling.
Great. Before we get to the bigger picture questions about Zoroastrianism, we just got a couple of questions about the length of Muktad. How many years is the Muktad supposed to be done for each loved one? If we stop praying the Muktad, can we restart at home or a temple after a couple of years? Sorry,
according to the Persian Rivat, Muktad should be done for one generation. One generation could be anything from, say, 18 to 30 years. So one does the Muktad for one generation. Can they be restarted? The answer is yes, but most priests in India, because of the acute shortage of priests when it comes to the Muktad celebrations, will dissuade their clients to restart the Muktads. But on the other hand, let me remind you and tell you that Muktads of some of our important people like Jamshedji Jijibai and those sort of people of the 18th century, their Muktads are still celebrated year after year in many of the fire temples in India. But one generation is what the Persian Rivats basically talk of.
Great. This is really helpful. Now, I think we're going to transfer to some of the questions more about Zoroastrianism as a whole. So Perinaz asks, do Zoroastrians believe in heaven and hell? Would love to hear more on this. Is this where the Christian concept of heaven and hell originated from?
May I say that in Zoroastrianism, the concept of the house of song and the house of deceit, the concept of individual judgment, the concept of resurrection, the coming of the Messiah, the concept of the last judgment, these are mainstream Zoroastrian eschatological ideas which entered post-exilic Judaism in the 4th century BCE and then moved into Christianity later on. So in fact, the concept of heaven and hell is a concept that I would say to you started from Zoroastrian theology and then permeated into the other later religions of the world.
We've got another question. In religion, dualism means the belief in two supreme opposed powers or gods. I think you used the term dualism. Do Zoroastrians believe in two gods?
Zoroastrians believe in one God, our master, but remember that in Zoroastrianism, because the Gathas themselves talk about a cosmic and ethical dualism, we recognize two spirits. Now, what does that mean? We cannot say that darkness comes from light. We cannot say that evil comes from good. Because there is good, if you move away from good, evil emerges. If you move away from light, darkness emerges. In other words, if, for example, because there is life, at some point death occurs. Death can't occur without there being life in the first instance. So Zoroastrianism, throughout its theology, recognizes a fundamental cosmic and ethical dualism from Zarathustra's Gathas onwards. Because I was focusing on the Muktad rituals, I haven't gone into the theology, but in many of my earlier master classes, I've tackled this. We believe in one God, our master, but we recognize that within this world that we live in, we have cosmic and ethical dualism. We don't worship the evil spirit. That's an important point to remember. We reject evil, all forms of evil. We uphold goodness. We don't uphold wickedness. We uphold life. We don't uphold death. So we have to recognize that Zoroastrianism perhaps is the only major religion in the world today that is able to explain logically and rationally the concept of evil, which other religions, I submit to you, would have great difficulty in explaining. And what do I mean by that? By that I mean, if something evil happens, people turn around and will flippantly say, it's the will of God. How can God, who is your creator and in a sense who has produced you, be responsible for a murder, to murder you, to kill you? It just doesn't make sense. So from a Zoroastrian point of view, we recognize dualism as the only rational way of tackling this whole business of evil. We don't believe in reincarnation, so we can't say something bad has happened to you in this life because in your past life you did something wrong, so you're paying for it in this life. We don't believe in predestination, that everything is destined. So if I don't study, obviously I'm not going to pass my exams just because in destiny it said that I'm going to pass it. So Zoroastrianism, I would say to whoever's asked this question, is the only religion in the world which is able to explain the development of evil and the rationality behind how evil operates in the world.
Well, that's inspiring, I think. We should all be proud as Zoroastrians for that. Another thing that might make you particularly proud, we've got a comment from Katie. Dear Khojeste, you would be proud to know that one of your AET students, your Athravan Educational Trust students, Irvad Zarir Bandara, along with his son Irvad Xerxes Bandara, has been performing the 10-day Muktad ceremony for the last 30 years. First 25 years he performed from his home, and since the last 5 years they've been doing it in their Atashkade in Northern California. We are grateful to Irvad Bandara, and we thank you for educating and creating priests of Irvad Bandara's cadre. I would actually like to take a question from this, even though this is just a statement of praise for you. What's the trade-off, or what's the difference between doing a Muktad at home personally versus having a priest perform it, or versus having a priest perform it at a, say, at a temple or something like that? Is there any kind of difference for how the soul is treated?
In the old days, priests performed the Muktad in their homes. Remember, fire temples only came into existence in the last 300 years. Before that, all the fires were in the homes of priests, and the Muktads were celebrated at home. So if you had a Muktad room in Mumbai, or some super wealthy Parsis still have their Muktads done in their private homes, they have a separate room, specially kept, called the Muktad room. So they call priests for 10 days, they call a woman to cook the food with ritual purity, etc. for 10 days, etc. So that is still done by some very few families that basically have these facilities. But I'm very happy that the Bandaras have joined in this program. Thank you very much for attending this program, and congratulations for the wonderful work that you are doing in California. I'm aware of it, albeit 10,000 miles away.
Following up from that, I have heard from my Mamaji that in Navsari a century ago, priests would go from home to home to perform prayers during Muktad, just as you described. Is that really how it happened? And if so, why did it stop?
Prayers in some of the smaller towns, etc., in some homes do happen at home, where you have the facility of priests who are willing to go home to do the ceremonies. Obviously, lay people do not know how to pray the Afrinagan ceremony, do not know how to pray the Fravishis, etc., unless it's some lay people learn the prayers and learn the ritual gestures, etc. But in India now, we do have Bedan Paswans, that is lay members of the laity, because of the shortage of priests, who have been allowed to perform the death ceremonies and the Muktad prayers. So they do go out of station, for example, to perform all the ceremonies that I've talked about. So this process has begun, certainly in India, where we have an acute shortage of priests.
Thank you. So we've got some more. You're doing very well with this rapid fire questioning. I'm sorry about this. I'm just reading out the chat in some respects.
Obviously, there's interest.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, most of our people have stuck around, which is rare for Q&A. So Armati asks another question. Why is the Chahar Shanbe Suri celebrated before the Muktads?
Why is it?
Why is the
I didn't hear that.
Chahar Shanbe Suri celebrated before the Muktads.
The Char Shanbe Suri, that the festival where you jump over the fire?
I believe so.
Well, it depends. It's celebrated after the Muktads because once again, it's celebrated as a sense of joy of all the people coming together. But this is specifically done in Iran. It's not something that is practiced in India at all. Another festival is celebrated in Iran where they do burn a fire. It's a winter festival, Jashan-e-Sadeh, 100 days before New Year, which falls in December. And in Iran, obviously, Iran is cold at that time of the year. They do build a huge bonfire. They do jump over it and so on and so forth. So in Iran, there does seem to be still a natural propensity to do some of the rituals that have been done, which I think in urbanized India, a lot of the Parsis have lost.
So we've got a question from Daisy. She's asking you a question that I think priests used to get killed over. Talking of the following Kadmi Shenshai or Fasli calendar, what is the real Zoroastrian New Year and the real Khordad Sal that we should be celebrating?
Well, on a flippant level, I would say celebrate all the festivals because it means you celebrate 2 New Years or 3 New Years, which means more good food, more new clothes, more interaction between families and so on and so forth. If you're asking me from a technical point of view, one should celebrate the New Year with the calendar in which your Naujot ceremony was done, in which your Sudre Pushin, if you're Persian, ceremony was done. That is the calendar that you should follow. The Fasli calendar is a seasonal calendar. Remember that the Fasli calendar only came about in 1905 through the efforts of a very great Iranist called K.R. Irani. Before that, you had 2 calendars. What happened was that in 1725, a priest from Iran, Kerman Jamas Vilayati, came to India, to Surat, and they were discussing issues whether the corpse of a Zoroastrian whether the legs should be straight or whether they should be bent when the corpse was disposed in the Tower of Silence. And in those discussions, it emerged that Vilayati discovered that the Parsi calendar was 1 month behind the Irani Qadimi calendar. They didn't agree to it. Nobody knew why that had happened. This is how you then get the Qadmis, those who felt that those following the Qadmi calendar in Iran, they must be right. The Parsis probably got their sums wrong. So they then came to be known as Qadimi. Qadimi means ancient. And they decided to follow the Irani calendar. Concurrently, the others who were living in India, the Parsis, they said, we have been following this calendar meticulously, and so we will continue following this calendar, and they came to be known as the Shahanshahis. In other words, the king's calendar. Now, it's only in the 20th century that I can tell you the goof up that happened. The goof up was that in 1026, that is 1,000 years ago, the Parsis remembered to intercalate 1 month as the 13th month. In other words, Pendarmad month was repeated as the 13th month with the same days. The Iranis, the Qadmis in Iran didn't do that, probably because of religious persecution, etc., etc. Then the Parsis forgot to intercalate the calendar 1 month every 120 years. Why 1 month every 120 years? Because each year we are losing 6 hours, X number of minutes and a few seconds. So if you take 6 hours every 4 years, it should be 1 day. Now we can't add on 1 day because we don't have a 6th Gatha day. And we can't just say, Avardat Salga, what do we pray on that day? What, for example, do we pray if a person dies on that day? So, because each day of the Zoroastrian calendar month is linked to what's called a shnuman, a small shnuman and a large shnuman, which is a blessing for the day. And every single fire temple, consecrated fire temple, therefore, is rigidly connected either to the Kadmi calendar or to the Shenshai calendar. In India, we just have one Parsi fire temple, which a few Irani Zarthoshtis living in India follow, but otherwise all the other fire temples in India either Kadmi or Shenshai. Remember that when you're initiated either by a Kadmi or a Shenshai priest. The Kadmi or Shenshai priest has a ritual connection literally going back 1,000 years. So if you want to maintain the tradition and continuity, then I would say to you, you follow the Kadmi and Shenshai one, but the seasonal calendar is relevant for the seasons. Interestingly, the Fasli calendar has never been followed in Iran till recent times. Remember that the 21st of March, Nowruz came in because it was Seljuki, who in the 10th century basically decided to take a poll tax from the Zoroastrians on the 21st of March. So if you look at any of our scriptures, and this is my open challenge to you all, look at any of our scriptures and try and show me where Nowruz was still celebrated on the 21st of March as of history. As a seasonal calendar, it makes perfect sense. But from a religious point of view, where you have to remember when the person died, when you have to do the death ceremonies, when you have to do all the other rituals linked to somebody who's died, the first month prayer, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, going all the way up to 12 months, and then yearly prayers. For that, you require either the Shenshai or the Kadmi calendars.
Thank you. I think we have one last question, and we appreciate all the time you spent. It's pretty late in India right now. This question is actually about the funeral practices and the role that dogs play in the funeral practices. I'd like to add a follow-up to that and ask if you could... Yeah, go ahead, please.
Dogs in funeral practices is very, very important. In the Western text, in the Vandidad, it talks of a dog who has two physical eyes and two spots above the physical eyes. And in Gujarati, that dog is referred to as a char akhno putro. Now, that dog is able to suss out any form of life. And that dog is able to contain what is deemed to be nasul, druje nasush, which means the demon of decomposition or putrefaction. So when a person dies, after the first watch, the druje nasush begins to increase coming out of the corpse. This is why in each watch, till the funeral ceremony takes place, a saddeed is done. Saddeed basically means sight of the dog. The dog is brought and the dog is meant to see the corpse. If the dog turns its face away, then obviously the person is dead. If the dog wags his tail, then the person is living. Now let me share with you a practical, real experience. When a film on Wings of Fire was being done, where they held a mock ceremony at Dungarwadi, I was physically there. They brought in the four-eyed dog, and every time they brought the dog and the script said that the dog turns its face away because the person is dead, the dog started wagging his tail. Because obviously there was a male model who was acting as a corpse in the film that was being shot. It wasn't a real funeral. And so the dog knew that this was not a real funeral, it was a mock funeral, and he started wagging his tail. The film director took 3 shots. On all 3 shots, the dog was wagging his tail. Eventually, they had to move the camera in a way not to show the tail of the dog. Now, this is as late as the mid-80s that I'm narrating this to you. So the dog plays a very important role. not just at funeral time, but even in the life of an everyday Zoroastrian. If you can't keep a dog as a pet in your home, then you're expected to do some form of charity for a dog. Now in India, obviously, there are a lot of street dogs. So Zoroastrians feed street dogs, or they give money to NGOs that look after street dogs, etc. And before, in a regular family, if you're traditional, before you start eating your own food, the first mouthful you're meant to give to your dog, and that in Gujarati is called kutrano buk. That's how important the dog is in the Zoroastrian tradition. The dog is the only animal that a fire temple always keeps.
Pashna is asking, why do people avert their gaze when the dog comes to the body?
Why does he?
Why do you avert your gaze when the dog comes in? You don't follow.
You avert your gaze, Pashna, when the body is lifted from the marble slabs onto the iron bier. That is because the spiritual wall that has been created by way of the Sachkar ritual, that is broken when the body is moved from the stone slabs onto the iron bier. That is when you don't actually see what the corpse bearers are doing. Otherwise, you certainly don't turn your face away whilst the funeral ceremony is going on, etc.
This is yes, this is probably a good question to end on. This is also about transitioning. When you do the muktads at your house and you follow that shortly after with the Khordad Sal celebrations, is there something the layperson at home should do in making the transition for the house? Is there anything to do post muktads to prepare for Khordad Sal celebration?
Basically, you celebrate the muktads, and after the muktads are over, the vases come back to you either from the fire temple, or if you're doing it at home, then those vases you wash properly in well water if you have access to well water, and then you put it in a place where nobody can touch it. In other words, nobody who's perhaps menstruating or any laws of, all the laws of purity have to be maintained. And then those vases are once again brought out a few days before the muktads begin. So for example, the vases that we will be using, we've already got them cleaned. They will be going to the fire temple early next week. And then the priest will do the necessary washing with well water. And then those vases will be placed for the muktad ceremony. Any other questions? I'm okay. It's only 11 o'clock. The night's young as far as...
Well, Khojeste is a live spirit, even though it's very late for him. So I think this is actually probably a good stopping point. Tanya has sent the links in the chat for where you can find this talk. There have been some requests for materials to be shared, and we'll do our best. I'll speak with Khojeste afterwards about that. If you want to get in contact with Khojeste, please feel free to reach out to him. It looks like there's one last question. You don't mind, do you, Kaka? Okay, Zareen, do you want to come on and ask your question? Zareen, you might be muted. If you want, you can just write it in the chat, Zareen. Well, how about this?
Hello.
Oh, there she is.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering whether you need, firstly, it's great to hear you, Khojeste, but are you supposed to use the same vase every year? What if that vase is not available? Is it okay to use another one if you're doing it at home?
Each one uses the same vase because on the vase it's consecrated with the name of the person and the day and date when the person died, etc. So as far as our muktads are concerned, the vase is the same vase that has been used from the first year of the muktads. But if for some reason you don't have a muktad vase and you want to start doing the muktads at home, if you're in India, the vase can be consecrated by a priest. If you don't have access to a priest, then you can still use the vase in your home with the kind of things that I've said that you can do at home and once again resurrect the communication with the spiritual world.
Thank you, because my mother's consecrated vase is in the Aghyari, Karani Aghyari in India. But I do my prayers with a different vase here.
Yes, I think that's perfectly okay. That's wonderful if you're doing it, no problem.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And it was nice to hear from you again, Zareen. So I think this is going to conclude the formal portion of the talk. If you want to hang back for a few minutes and ask questions, I think the recording will be turned off. But before we officially conclude, please join me in thanking Khojeste for this illuminating chat. Thank you so much, Kaka.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to say a very big thank you to FEZANA, to Arzan, to you, Dinsha, and I'd also like to thank my Shireen, who basically put all the slides together with, of course, Feroza's help and supervision. So from our side, it's all three of us who would like to say a big thank you to you all. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I hope there's something food for thought for you all. And I hope you celebrate the Muktads and remember your dear and dear ones with greater feeling and fervor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Khojeste. I'm so happy we have this recording. It's going to benefit so many people in our community who have questions around this festival, so they can now learn from you. Thank you, Dinsha, for moderating and hosting this session as well. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to leave links again. If you want to stay in touch with us, just follow us on our social accounts. You can also go on FEZANA.org and subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll get more updates about future FEZANA Talk events. Thank you, everybody.
So I have a fun question now that the recording isn't officially over, but I'm assuming it'll stop soon.